Welcome to our presentation where we'll be understanding the implications of Trump's tariffs on the US dollar. On the 2nd of April, President Trump proclaimed Liberation Day, where he revealed a large distribution of tariffs towards 90 countries. The US currently has a trade deficit with all these countries, and thus it's framed as a necessary corrective measure to address decades of open US markets being met with asymmetrical foreign tariffs. The solution is aggressive retaliation, and it's ultimately aimed to push onshore manufacturing. There is a possibility of a trade war, as China has the highest imposed tariffs out of all countries impacted. However, this led to widespread chaos, and fear among the markets caused the S&P 500 to crash. Across the world, markets saw their economy crashing, with consumer confidence dropping. Looking at the history of international trade, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was established in 1947, a provisional agreement to ease trade barriers and provide a framework for negotiations and dispute resolutions. The World Trade Organization was created after and expanded to assist developing economies with growing their trade capacity. The Bretton Woods system aimed to stabilize the global monetary system with a fixed exchange rate. President Nixon, on the other hand, later suspended the direct convertibility of the dollar to gold by eliminating the gold standard. Both of these events were significant, yet Nixon marked the transition to a floating exchange rate system where currencies are traded freely and their values fluctuate based on demand and supply. I'm now going to hand over to Denise to discuss this further.
Great, thanks, Maddie. To better understand the impact of Trump's tariff policies, we need to look at the unique role of the US dollar in the global economy. Since the Bretton Woods Agreement, as Maddie mentioned, in 1944, the US dollar has served as the world's main reserve currency. This means most international trade, debt, and foreign reserves are held in the US dollars and not in local currencies. Next page. Because of this, the US has a special power called the seigniorage. It's the ability to borrow and spend more than other nations. In simple terms, the US can print money and the rest of the world will still accept it. Next slide, please. Now, why does this matter for Trump's policy and tariffs? Trump's approach wasn't just about protecting American industries, it was also about using the US dollar's dominance as leverage. His administration likely believed that even with aggressive tariffs, countries would continue to rely on the US dollar, giving the US an advantage that other nations don't have. In other words, the US could afford to take risk and still maintain its economic power. However, this only works as long as the world trusts the US dollar. If countries start shifting towards alternatives such as the Chinese yen or euro, or even maybe digital currencies, America's unique advantage appear. That's what makes Trump's tariff strategy risky. So while tariffs may look like a way to fix trade issues or reduce debt, they're only possible because of the dollar's special role. If that status is ever challenged, the consequences could go far beyond our trade war or maybe lead to much more financial shock.
Thanks, Denise. Trump's announcement of extensive tariffs on trading partners across the world on April 2nd is an extreme response to many international economic realities, including the US national debt of $36 trillion and continued current account deficits. While Trump's showmanship can make it a challenge to ascertain his true intentions, revenues raised from tariffs can be put towards reducing America's national debt. Trump has also outwardly campaigned on promises of bringing back jobs for the US. Extended high levels of tariffs by the US also have the potential to force foreign businesses to relocate their operations to the US to avoid the crippling effects of tariffs, particularly given the size of the US market. Using tariffs to create jobs formed a major part of Trump's campaign strategy to garner support from working class Americans. The benefits of creating new jobs, however, is likely to be limited, especially when it is compared to the benefits advertised by Trump, according to Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis. Trump's attempt to appeal to the working class through tariffs and the promise of bringing back jobs has also been criticized by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, given Trump's history of tax cuts for higher tax brackets. Trump's economic plans have been described by Yanis as him wanting to have his cake and eat it too, given he is aiming to lower the value of the US dollar while simultaneously keeping the dollar as the world's fiat currency. Although this may appear to be a somewhat lofty and contradictory aim, Yanis believes it is possible given there are no other global currencies that are strong enough to hold the title of a global fiat currency. Furthermore, President Trump can look towards the Nixon shock of 1971 as evidence of the US devaluing the dollar or remaining the dominant currency. The Nixon shock occurred when President Nixon made the unilateral decision to float the US dollar, which had previously been pegged to the gold price. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. So I will be discussing Trump's decision to implement the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs. I'll be covering what is currently happening during these 90 days and what predictions and forecasts can be made about what will happen once the tariffs go back into effect in July. On April 9th, Donald Trump announced a complete 3-month pause on his reciprocal tariffs for over 74 countries. This was following the turmoil in financial markets that erased trillions of dollars from stock markets across the world. The red graph shown on my slide here demonstrates how just before the pause, tariffs were set to reach the highest rate they had been for over 100 years. Tariff rates that were being introduced will now revert to the lower baseline rate, allowing time for trade negotiations to occur, helping ease some of the current trade tensions. On announcement of the pause, markets surged, which can be seen here in the blue chart displayed from the NBC, demonstrating how the markets rebounded after days of heavy losses. The short-term pause has been welcome news to investors, and markets' hopes are that the pause will allow some stability for trade agreements to be reached. My next slide will discuss the predictions. So it's difficult to predict what will happen in July once the pause ends, which is leading to the high uncertainty not only for businesses, but for consumers as well. Many economists predict that we are looking at not only more retaliation in terms of trade wars, but also rising unemployment, inflation, and further increases to the cost of living. The pause currently looks promising in terms of a potential extension. However, some still forecast a recession, with economists at Goldman Sachs currently predicting a 45% chance of recession in the next 12 months. Some indicators that are being used to assess this in the US economy are consumer spending, manufacturing output, and of course the upcoming second quarter GDP report for any signs of economic contraction. Wayne Weingarten, an economist from the Pacific Research Center, commented to the full tariff rates that the president announced, then the economic headwinds will increase significantly, leading to even greater job and income losses. When the 90-day tariff pause ends, it will be a pivotal moment for the US economy, as we see which direction the Trump administration will take. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. With what we have discussed so far, what will the future risk and global impact be? So is Trump's tariff plan an economic fix or a global risk? Trump's tariff plan aimed to generate more government revenue from trade, rebalance trade deficits, strengthen domestic industries, leverage the US dollar's signal range advantage. However, in reality, tariffs are taxes on imports, not structural solutions to US long-term debt problem. While they may boost short-term revenue, they also increase costs for consumers and businesses, especially those reliant on global supply chains. Historical evidence from Trump's 2018 till 2019 tariff wars show retaliation from trade partners, damaging US exporters and causing job losses. The real drivers of US debt, with the rising entitlement spending, persistent deficits, and tax cuts, still remain unaddressed. If tariffs slow global growth and reduce tax revenues, they may actually worsen the debt problem. Besides, there are also global risks. The 1930s Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act led to a global depression, offering a cautionary precedent. A renewed and prolonged trade war today could disrupt global supply chains, spur inflation, destabilize currencies, and spark recessions in interconnected economies. Next slide, please. While the US dollar remains dominant due to trust, liquidity, and lack of viable alternatives, weaponizing the dollar through tariffs and sanctions has motivated countries to explore de-dollarization. Although a global shift away from the dollar would take decades, continued unilateral US actions could accelerate this trend. Next slide, please. So, will Trump's plan succeed or collapse? Trump's tariff plan is unlikely to achieve its economic goals. Global retaliation, increased inflation, weakened US dollar's trust, and potential geopolitical isolation make it a risky and unsustainable strategy. While it may have short-term political appeal, the plan risks triggering a global crisis reminiscent of the 1930s, with long-lasting consequences for the US and the world economy. That is all for our presentation today, and all our references are in the last slide. Thank you.